This is the healthcare scene after party. We can talk about precision medicine, talk a little bit more about what you're doing at HIMSS. Shahid, any questions you have for Curtis or Dr. Delaney?
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about it. Maybe as we look towards HIMSS, one of the biggest questions and the objections that we get with respect to not specifically any particular tool that SAP or others are building, but just the idea of analytics in healthcare is it's easy for a big company or a big group or a big institution like Mercy to pull this off, but it's really not easy for anybody else to do it. And I think you can tell by the tone of my voice that that's not actually true. I was wondering if you guys could comment a little bit and say, how do people get started? If you have to say that you have to have formal data governance to get started with precision medicine and these kind of analytics tools, what is the requirement to begin this process? Is it the need itself? Is it the gateway drug, like John said? Where do you think people should start?
Well, I could share my thoughts on it. I think it begins with understanding what are the metrics that drive your business. What we wanted to do is sit down with we take a service line oriented approach. So we sat down with perioperative leaders and we said, what are the things you want to look at? And we really didn't try to influence that a whole lot in the very beginning. We wanted to know we wanted to know what they thought the right metrics were. We started with that and built a team of people inside of Periop to kind of go through, define what the relevant data points that need to be included in the data model. And then we started to do some mock-ups or some prototypes of what the delivery of that needed to look like. And what was interesting about that, and I think is important to note, is that this is a journey. So when they started seeing some of the information, it started highlighting some of the data quality problems within their own data, some of the process issues that needed to change. And it was something that in the very beginning, there was a lot of process re-engineering, there was a lot of data quality issues, things that had to be corrected or addressed within their own processes, that the delivery of the metrics or the transparency and visibility of the data was really highlighting for them. So there's part of that has to be included when you embark on a process like that. Go after the metrics that are most important, not the 100 metrics, but maybe the 5 most important. Start to source and map all the data elements that are relative to that and make it an iterative review process. So you're going to reflect the metric, you're going to react to it, you're going to make some changes to it. And governance is a great way to deal with that. We set up a governance group inside of perioperative services that we could interact and work with. We had strong leadership support from the perioperative leaders that they committed the time and energy and effort to go and work through this with us. So those are some things I would highlight about the process. Start small, focus on what's most important, incorporate governance, and then make it an iterative review. And there's back and forth between review the metric and make corrections and changes.
Yeah, and David, so I guess from the tooling perspective, modeling in general is a concern. How much of what Curtis is saying could, just from a tooling perspective, it help? Or since you're looking across multiple customers, are the 5 metrics that Curtis would start with and the 5 that you would use at maybe 10 other healthcare institutions, is there enough commonality there where you can walk in and say, okay, here's our foundation for healthcare, and these are the metrics you guys should start with, even in these specialties, like whether it's perioperative or anywhere else? Or do you usually start with a clean slate? Is it pre-modeled, post-modeled? How do you guys start that normally?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I mean, there's certainly, as much as every organization believes themselves to be entirely different, there is, commonality for sure between them. But that said, no two are exactly alike, right? And so, going back to your question, so, is this something out of the reach of smaller organizations? And I'd say in the past, that was probably a fair statement. It was, somewhat a story of haves and have-nots. Large organizations that have enough capabilities to, hire someone of the caliber of Curtis and to give them a team and the ability to drive value. When I looked across the country at the haves and have-nots, oftentimes, the haves, when they're doing really cool things in analytics, you go and you open the door into the back room and there would be 50, 100, sometimes 200, data analysts, data scientists, munging things in Excel spreadsheets and doing a lot of manual work to create these analytics. And while the results were impressive, they simply weren't scalable, and they were beyond the reach of small organizations. And I think what's changed is the technology is becoming an equalizer. It's making things more simple. And the things Curtis is talking about doing, they can be created more rapidly than before, but I think equally exciting is the tail to maintain them or to update them to when you swap a new system in or change something out. The ability to true up the system and keep it functional is much less. And a lot of organizations today simply struggle with the fact that 80% plus of their resources are just keeping the lights on, maintaining current system, and there's very little left to actually innovate. And when you make it quicker to be able to develop, you make it easier to support what you have developed, you can do far more with fewer resources. So I think that's one way where technology is enabling it. The other is, traditionally with the 20th century disk-based relational databases, I mean, they've served us very well, and they continue to be a really good tool for some uses, but they're not so great when you do not yet understand the important relationships in the data, and you're trying to, in an agile fashion, add additional data in, mine it for value, identify single multivariate correlations and such. They really have required a lot of modeling, seeing how it works, and then tearing it down and remodeling, resubstantiating the data. A lot of pre-aggregations, indices, pre-calculations, and a lot of complexity to ask the question, and if you haven't answered it well, to refactor it again. And usually that's happening with both the technology experts along with domain experts periodically checking in to make sure they're not off course. When you work with something much simpler like an in-memory computing platform, you can now work literally shoulder to shoulder with the technologist and the domain expert and have them model out the data, show it to the domain expert, hear what's right, what's not right, refactor it while they're sitting there and review it again. So you can compress months of time into a single hour or two session with them and have a far more agile product. So that really also has lowered the bar. And then lastly, I'd say, is there's tools now. We acquired an excellent one through acquisition of a company called Infinite Insight that allows you to do data mining using a GUI on top of it, right? So it will go through and look at KPIs you care about and mine through the data and come back. It'll apply 20-something different models from simple regression to more complex models, find the best model, and then come back with a rank-ordered list ranked based on the strength of correlation, both single and multivariate. It's essentially almost a data scientist in a box, but it's something that can greatly empower organizations. And then lastly, the ability now to consume it in the cloud as well as on premise, I think decreases the cost of entry, both from dollars as well as technology. So it's not perfect that smallest of hospitals still can't afford what the richest of hospitals can, but I think the gap is narrowing, and those who use technology in an agile, smart fashion can compete far better than they ever could before.
And Curtis, so David mentioned in his earlier remarks that replication is not required, or necessarily in all cases is not required. Did you find that was the case, or are you guys really replicating what's in the EHR and your variety of other systems into HANA, and it just requires fewer replications rather than no replication of data?
Well, one thing I would highlight is that we found that right now there are so many different work efforts around analytics, and people are asking. So the number. So part of the group I have is the group that moves data from point to point. So the number of extractions that we see coming off our main data platform going out to different components. So the data replication is a real problem, more now than it's ever been before, because there's so much effort to send data out to different groups for both externally to quality and safety metrics and other agencies that are benchmarking or measuring healthcare. We're sending data out to Leapfrog and other places like that. So there's a lot of data flying around in lots of different places. So the data replication, just want to highlight, that's a significant issue for us. We are finding with the smart data access that we can configure inside of HANA and being able to connect back to our main platform. So we've done a couple of things so far. One is that we've been moving data from the EHR, which is an Epic Oracle structure, into HANA. So we can have the data sit on top of that, it feeds it and it connects it. So we're moving down the path of real-time HL7 feeds with the EHR to stream data into HANA. And then the other part that we're working on is to build out our Hadoop Hadoop-based platform and set HANA on top of that Hadoop-based platform. So, and that's going to be our long-term. So we've got some interim components. Our long-term thoughts at this point in time are that Hadoop would be the main structure that we would load most of the data in from EHR, ERPs, and other components. HANA sits on top of that and is the tool that we connect, and then we configure smart data access with how much we want to load in memory versus how much we want to go from a long term. And in that strategy, we think we can minimize the data replication pieces that you're talking about.
Interesting. So there's John, you want to take that question that just came in?
Yeah, so Dr. Legion, which I always call him Jimmy Vanagan, but so I never know how to pronounce his last name. But anyways, he asked, what does the user interface look like? I guess I would extend it to, are you able to share data in real time, which I think we talked about the real time component. Absolutely, it's real time. That's what you're doing. What's the data interface look like, the user interface? Is it basically a dashboard interface, or, you have all the drill down functionality as well, so...
Yeah, what's neat about, or what I think is beneficial about what we're doing is that what we learned early on is that we have to design the user interface based on the audience. So having flexibility in the delivery mechanism is really important because, how an analyst wants to look at data versus how a physician or a clinician wants to look at data is different. And I think that what we've been able to do is come up with some different looks of the data that allow that to be tailored to the audience. So in other words, most of our dashboard starts off with a high-level tile-oriented view. So it's got a tile for cost per case, it's got a tile for block utilization, it's got a tile for patient logistics, it's got a tile for what we call financial stewardship, and those are pretty common. But then you have the ability with the layers beneath that to really customize it more to a particular view of the data, and then within the SAP Business Objects framework, you can even save a particular view that you like. We call them view sets. So I can save a view set of a particular set of data within the Explorer view that's specific to how I want to see the data. And that takes some time for folks to kind of understand the full capabilities of the platform. There's some education that you kind of walk through. That's why I keep talking about this as a culture change and an evolution that has to happen. It doesn't happen overnight. You start out with a dashboard that's pre-baked, and it's got this look, this feel. But then as people become more educated on the capabilities, then we can start to bring in some functionality around view sets and personalization and some other components that really make it a more robust experience over time.
And Curtis, how does data quality fit into your governance process? Is that something that you found quality is already good enough for you, or has that had to change because more analytics is being done on it? And I ask really because in what we see in a lot of customer sites is that as they begin to use this data, people realize how bad the data is. Did that happen with you guys, or was your data pretty good at the beginning?
Absolutely. No, you're exactly right. The more we measure, the more data quality problems we found. So, and that's the neat thing about what you measure, you manage, right? What you measure, you also focus on the data quality behind that as well. So yes, it's definitely highlighted that the issues of data quality, and we're looking at a more robust master data management strategy and plan in this next fiscal year and the years to follow. And that has some technology components to it. It also has some people components, the role of the data steward in each area of our business and how they relate to the overall data stewardship program of the entire organization. But that's an issue, and we continue to struggle and deal with the issues as they arise. And I expect that's going to continue to be a problem that we'll be highly focused on.
Right. And David, would you say that if you look at these two topics, replication on the one hand and cleansing of data on the other as being two cornerstone concerns, what capabilities does HANA have in it, and who are your partners that you work with if cleansing and replication have to be done externally?
Yeah, so I really honestly haven't met an organization that is happy with the quality of the data when they start out, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I mean, one of the challenges that's been, or criticisms that's been leveled at the electronic health records are, people, they're really a platform to justify and rationalize billing, and charges. And you know, as a physician, and I made this transition, you know, when I practice as well, from paper to electronic, it's longer, it takes more time, and you're just trying to figure out how to get through your day. So, you know, unless you know something is being used in a very key fashion, you tend to just do it as quickly as possible, right? So some of this is when you begin to use data and people look at the data and say it's not right, you know, as owners and the people entering the data, you know, you begin to understand how it's going to be used downstream, and so you begin to create a virtuous cycle. The more you use data and depend on it, the more you understand how it's important to capture it. And so, you know, really to get to the more advanced benefit for electronic health records and that investment, it's going to take better quality data, which is going to be both, you know, in how it's captured in terms of EHR, but also in the way in which people capture it using the EHR. So we need to get to a point where it's being leveraged better and more often. And that's kind of some of the challenges up front out of the gate. You know, with our work with ASCO, I mean, certainly running into this challenge, you know, actually in a much greater scale, because you look at a given data point with an institution, you know, such as Mercy, you could typically look at it and say, well, it's coming from, you know, Epic, and it is, you know, a structured picture list, unstructured, and kind of deal with it accordingly. When we're working on something like ASCO, you know, there be many EHRs any given field could come from. And you know, each EHR might range from a very locked down, you know, type of pick list to unstructured. So we have to introduce the notion of veracity to each data element when you start doing aggregates across large data sets, to really understand how you can weigh the result, you know, based on the veracity of the underlying data and what parts you might want to weigh based on the veracity. So there's a lot of data science in that as well. So, and that's part of what we're developing in a Foundation for Health, you know, is the ability to do NLP pipeline in ontologies, then to map it onto a simplified data model. I think part of evolution and thinking is that there is no perfect data model, at least in our opinion. There's good, you know, good starting points and maybe better starting points, but they all have to evolve based on the local needs of the institution. And so really getting started, beginning to leverage it and feeding it back to the doctors like they're doing at Mercy is the most important thing you can do to begin that virtuous cycle of beginning to, you know, improve the data quality in the organization. And frankly, getting people to be willing to serve on, you know, data governance committees, because, you know, for busy docs, it's not an exciting prospect, right? And it's hard to get them engaged to do it until they start seeing the power of the data and start understanding the importance. And then I think it's easier to get folks engaged and more passionate about what can be a rather dry topic, you know, if you're just looking at it in a vacuum.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it reminds me of what Alan Portela said. He said, we're going to live in an environment of heterogeneous systems. And as more and more hospitals combine, we're seeing that more and more. So everyone's going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I realized I didn't really, you know, finish up on, you know, the other reality is I think, you know, the old-fashioned thing of trying to take all data that might be relevant, you know, physically move it in, cleanse it, and populate it in, then create your, you know, aggregates, your pre-calcs, your indices, then create the data mart, and then deploy it. You know, the time to do that, you know, is typically many quarters, many millions of dollars, and there's a high cost to maintain that over time as data sources get, you know, changed or as you need to add more in, right? So really what we're doing with HANA is, you know, and this has been a several year process, is really streamlining our ability to leverage data no matter where it resides, right? So we have a product called Vora that helps us do in-depth analysis in a distributed fashion on data in Hadoop as well as HANA. We also have nearline access capabilities even within HANA that uses a high-speed disk-based columnar technology, which is very cheap. So you can leverage that in context with HANA, with data in Hadoop or any other relational data store, no matter where it is. And within HANA modelers, it all looks like one data source. So, you know, typically you follow the Pareto or the 80-20 principle that, you know, about 20% of your data is going to have 80% of your value. Keep that in memory, and everything else you have pointers to and leverage it no matter where it lives. And then the great thing with HANA is we're able to actually do the data pulling in and cleansing real time. It's so fast. So really shifting from your traditional ETL to ELT, to extract it, load it into HANA, and transform it in situ all real time and process it. So it's a very different way, a far more agile way of working.
Yeah, it's actually pretty neat. So there are some architectures. One specific architecture called Lambda Architecture that comes to mind that people are starting to use these days for this switch from ELT to transform real time. So maybe Curtis, you can. I don't know how much time we have, John, but if you want to just say some closing remarks with respect to this idea that, and John said it at the beginning, at the top of the hour, that there's still a lot of not invented here syndrome in healthcare. There's still a lot of reinventing of the wheel syndromes in healthcare. So based on Mercy and the fact that what I really love what you guys are doing is you're not just doing this for Mercy, but you're offering those capabilities to other health systems to say, look, if you can't do this, just come to us and there are things that we can help you with or work on. How much of that could apply to analytics? Is it so specific to institutions, or is there a lot of repeatable things that you could use from Mercy and what you've learned to apply to other health systems?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. I think that is one of the things that we have a great opportunity in healthcare is to leverage the work that's been done in other places so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And what we're trying to do at Mercy is take what we've created for ourselves, which I do think, such as peri-op, our cost per case. Every organization wants to know their cost per case, their supply, their implant, and all those different components. Every organization wants to know block utilization. Everybody wants to know patient logistics and how. So there's a lot of things in many areas that apply to every healthcare provider that's out there. And Mercy is very interested in extending those capabilities to other providers so that we're a large organization and we have a lot of IT people invested in this. And if I can take what we've done and I can provide that to another organization at a discounted rate, it offsets and lowers my own cost. And that's really the incentive for me, is to be able to take what we've done, extend that to another organization, provide them a high valued service at a lower cost than it would be for them to create it on their own, and it offsets and lowers Mercy's costs at the same time. I think there's a lot of opportunity to work with other providers. And I think that just having been in healthcare for 20 plus years, we don't do a lot of things together. And I think that this is an opportunity. Analytics is certainly a space that we could come together and we could, especially those providers that are not in competitive markets, where there's lots of areas for us to come together around analytics and lower our costs across the board, both for Mercy and for the providers that we're working with.
Yeah, that shared service model is not used very often, so I'm glad that you're able to mention that,